that will be hitting our cinema screens, looking at three estranged sisters in very different stages of their lives who move back in together during their dying father's final days. As I mentioned, it's his three daughters. It stars Carrie Coon as Katie, Elizabeth Olsen as Christina, and Natasha Lyonne as Rachel. And it covers several themes that may resonate with you: preemptive grief, family dynamics in a time of loss, and with, yes, some of those emotions that I mentioned: love, anger, and possibly resentment. Well, two of the three leads are with me now in the studio. Emmy nominated, congratulations, Carrie Coon, star of many films such as Gone Girl and the new Ghostbusters reboot, as well as the TV hit The Gilded Age. You'll also see her in the upcoming season of White Lotus. Star power continues. Beside her, Elizabeth Olsen, Emmy nominated Marvel Universe star who plays Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch in several films, and a TV series, WandaVision. She also starred as Candy Montgomery in the miniseries Love and Death, among many other roles. Carrie, who is Katie, Elizabeth, who is Christina, welcome to Woman's Hour.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, let us speak about this beautiful film, three daughters who come together in their father's dying days. And I want to start with the line that really stood out to me. And it spoke about the fact that depictions of death and of dying in film and TV is not instructive. Yet that is exactly what both of you set out to do with this film. Carrie, let me begin with you. How did you approach that?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, certainly death is one thing we all have in common. We're all going one way. We all have to deal with it in one way or another. And I feel that it's particularly in Western civilization, death has become very far from us. We don't deal with the bodies anymore. We don't stand them up in the parlor and keep vigil for 3 days. We pay somebody to take care of all of the details.
The messy details.
Exactly. And I feel like for that reason, we're woefully underprepared, maybe in a way we never have been in an earlier time. And so a lot of art forces us to reckon with it.
It's interesting, actually, that word vigil. I was thinking when I was coming into you, what is it that these three women are doing with each other? But they're kind of standing vigil, Elizabeth, for their father.
Well, certainly some better than others. My character, Christina, I think has a bit more is more comfortable sitting in that role. And I think that's part of the dynamic that unfolds in the film, is how everyone's handling it differently, but also how do we cohabitate again after not doing so for so many years. And
because those relationships, they're basically forced into, often, I think this will resonate with them as well, into a couple of rooms. There's that kind of claustrophobic atmosphere as well. How was that to try and act through? It felt like confines. Was it like that when you were on set?
Yeah, we had lots of restrictions on this job, which was what made it so special, was one of the reasons why it made it so special. We had limitations from a budget, we had limitations from a crew, and then the actual space itself is a real rent-controlled apartment in New York. So there's no flying walls, no great lights on cranes coming through windows. We were really working with what we had, and I think those restraints are what was most freeing potentially for all of us, to shoot within that space and hide in corners when we weren't needed. And I think it added to the film experience and the film itself, because I think you can tangibly feel it when watching.
It's very strong emotions. But what was it like to work together? And I'll start with you, Elizabeth, and then come to you, Carrie, to work so closely, physically and emotionally, because it's almost like a play when you're watching it. I don't know if that was something you felt while doing it.
Well, I certainly prepared it as if we were doing a play, because it's a language forward script. It starts with two characters speaking in monologue form, which I don't think most films try to do ever, because I think it's kind of jarring for an audience to retrain their ear in a way, at least for American audiences. I feel like there might be a cultural difference here versus there. And so I did prepare it as a play, and I think we all came together as a company in that way.
Yes, I mean, certainly the language, preparing the language, but then also the idea that we were going to shoot it in order, which you never do in TV and film now. And so in that way, it also unfolded like a play because we lived through the story as we were telling it, which allowed us to arrive at a surprising place by the time we came to the end, which I know Lizzie speaks of very eloquently, just how we didn't know, for example, the shape we would end up in on the couch. That came very organically from the way the
and that
events
is
unfolded.
the three sisters as the story evolves. But of course, the main character, in a way, is the father to these three women. But there's also that line about, coming back to how it's depicted on TV, death, that really death is absence and the rest is fantasy. And you're trying to represent what people are going to feel, that absence. I thought it was clever not to meet Vinny, their father, for a while.
Yes. And Ozza was very clear about, he wasn't sure if the father would...
The
director, Ozza Jacobs, wasn't sure if the father would ever appear in the film. And yet, I won't give away exactly how that unfolds, but it was important to him that in order to communicate what absence feels like, you had to see him to know what they were missing. And so though he is looming sort of over the metronome of his heart monitor is what's driving the rhythm of the movie, it was important for Ozza that you would finally get a chance to experience him the way the daughters had, so that you would know what they were losing. And I think that's a smart way to do it.
And they also talked, this gave me pause, that you can't really know a person until they've died. You don't see the full person.
Oh, yes. I mean, I haven't lost my parents, thankfully, but I have 4 siblings, and I can imagine the sort of cobbling together of a life, but it's all from our different perspectives.
Or you often think of your parent at the time that they're dying, and it's only until I lost my father probably about a year and a half ago, and it's only until they have died that you go back to their earlier incarnations.
Yes, and you start to think of all the things you never asked and that you never knew and that you will now never, ever know. And your perception of them, if you have siblings, is so prismatic. There's no sort of one solid entity. It's all from these revolving points of view, and it's hard to make a person out of it.
Yeah, and I think the other element to that is that's how we're viewing our father, but it's also how we view each other. We've decided the roles that either of us play within this family unit, and at the beginning of the film we're all sort of performing to those ideas, and then that starts to become more complicated as the film goes on. But it's a role that I think we all can relate to in different ways within our own family structure.
You know, I just mentioned to our listeners a couple of moments ago that we were speaking about this. Lots of messages in already. Shall I read a couple of them?
Yes.
So good to hear this being spoken about. My mum passed away recently, and while I felt the worst sides of members of my family came out, I felt I handled it in my mum needing the peace and suppressing my reactions to the madness around me. Because there is kind of a madness, because it's as serious as life gets, right? Life and death. She goes on to say, hard but needed for the health of my mum. Now, of course, the suppression is unravelling a bit, but the whole experience of loss has taught me patience with myself and others. Here's another. I'm a triplet. And me and my sisters cared for our dad at home until he passed. We learnt about the individual capacity for forgiveness of each other. As our own thresholds were challenged daily, we saw the fragility of life watching our dads ebb away. We were lost and found daily. We are now forever bonded by our trauma.
Oh, that articulates so beautifully what's happening in the film. And, one of the things I love about it is it never feels like a big swing for a movie about what this is like. It felt very realistic to me in that those moments she talks about of grace and apology and forgiveness, they are sort of inadequate in the film in a way. And for me, for Katie, she's the controlling older sister who's trying to control the external details so as not to have to reckon with what's happening inside of her. She's, she has these moments of trying to make headway, and I think her sisters accept that they are unfolding within Katie's limitations, and they sort of give her that grace in the film, and that to me speaks very much to that comment and felt so real to me when I read it.
Yes, I think with Katie, she's hard, right? She's hard, and she wants to control the situation, as you can see, and concentrates on one aspect that she wants to get done. And as I think people often do in times of crisis, you try to control the bits that you can. And also you make a lot of food.
That's right. Yes, feeding everyone becomes sort of the thrust of her existence. And whereas I think Lizzie's character, Christina, is the one who's able to really sit with our father, and doing so becomes the surprising center of the trio.
Yeah, and it starts off so differently. And that's kind of something that showed itself, like Carrie had mentioned, because we filmed in order. It wasn't very clear necessarily in the writing how we were supposed to feel or act, or what is actionable by the end of it, and our reactions to, I mean, it's always hard to speak to an end of a movie, but where we go by the end of the film. And it was only because of the existing through it and the sitting with and the surprises of the humor that we were able to find that sort of levity and I think the fragility by the end.
I think sitting with is also such a good term, because my goodness, there's a lot of sitting. There's a lot of waiting, and there's even that humor about, I even remember myself when a hospice person comes in and everybody's trying to put a time limit on something, which,
can't really be discerned. Yeah,
exactly.
And the same lecture happens every day. Well, it's coming any minute now. And yeah, the absurdity of that. And, it was really important to Ozzy to capture the feeling of what that time is.
Yeah.
Because you're existing sort of outside of the rhythms of your life. And it was very important to Ozzy to feel how time sort of stretches and compresses, and how something that normally would be fast in your life is somehow unfolding much more slowly, and that there's always this metronome of the machines in the back room, and that's sort of the rhythm that everyone is either pushing against or living with, and I just feel that he's done a good job capturing what that liminal space is.
Definitely, lots more coming in. It was the most moving experience. I didn't expect the grief of losing Dad to be exacerbated by the loss of spending time with my sisters, who are also my best friends. So probably getting into that. Also, my stepdad died very suddenly last year from cancer. It was always hard for me to accept him, because it meant accepting the death of my dad. But last year, faced with the prospect of my stepdad's death, I suddenly realised at the age of 35 how much he meant to me and how painful his loss was. On his death's door, my sister and I finally signed adoption papers, and I could finally see him for the father he has been. We were all together with him when he passed. I miss him terribly, but take comfort that we had a meaningful goodbye, and I could say to him he was my dad, and he said to me I was his daughter.
Oh,
Wow, that's really interesting.
That's beautiful.
There's also the relationship we have with Natasha is that she's a stepsister, and that comes up in different ways within the film, and you wouldn't know, because we're all just siblings, as you treat one another the same, until Katie has some I don't know, some hang-ups on what that means to her and how she relates to her.
Well, it's childish, with some of the little girl in you sometimes comes out in these moments of grief. I think like every aspect of your relationship you've ever lived is sort of present in the room when you're about to lose it, I think.
And you're also very, very tired.
Yes. So very, very
sleep.
tired.
Yeah. And we all know what can happen in that. But, coming back to you, Elizabeth, you talked about, how would it play out? I did read that you felt you flourished in that environment that, to me, felt raw, tight, deep.
Do you mean flourished as in in my personal life, or the doing?
In working in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I
think you talked about tapping into a softness.
Yes, there is a softness to this character that I got to play. That was something that I certainly didn't get to do with Candy Montgomery in Love and Death. And I loved that. Thanks. But there's certainly really no softness there.
No.
And so there is something about this woman who's performing the tools that we have learned to create a sense of mindfulness or growth in ourselves, like breath work, like yoga, mindfulness, trying to spend time with her father while singing and reading. And although those are performative, I do believe that those are also tools that have been useful to her. And so she's been able to kind of just be as much as she can with the obstacles that her sisters have presented. But she's also resisting being herself fully around them. So she keeps trying to create these personal spaces, because that's the the path of least resistance for her, and so there's that. But I think specifically the constraints of how we filmed it. It's some of the most freeing ways of working, and to strip away all the things that are unnecessary. It really just focuses on the work, and it really just felt like such a close-knit family getting to make this for such a short period of time.
More messages coming in. Set up a sibling WhatsApp group in the last months before my father's death. It was invaluable. We finally, all four of us, came together to be with Dad. The WhatsApp group has seen us through grief, practical arrangements, division of tasks, and still dealing with probate. Yeah, that can take a while. Hi, I'm Diana. I have 5 siblings. In the days leading up to my dad's death, we all stayed in the house together to support our mum. We had rotas to be in their bedroom as we didn't want our parents to be on their own at the end. We're a very close family, and being together made us even closer. Knowing we were all under the same roof, it gave us strength and courage to cope with the end. That depth of love and support has continued and also carried us through the loss of our mum. We all played to our strengths. Some took on more personal roles, some cooked meals, some laughed and joked. I'm so proud to be part of such a fantastic family. So obviously that's something that has very much worked out. But I do want to underline as well, because we're talking about these, preemptive grief and loss, but it's also very funny.
Yes, because life is absurd.
Right?
Life.
Black
And
humour.
whenever I see something that's humorless, it doesn't feel real to me, because I know how my family deals with things. When my grandma was in hospice, we all hid alcohol in the bushes because you weren't supposed to have it in there. And we would always be laughing. And the nurses would go, did she go? We're like, no, we're fine. And I mean, it was just all, like, we laughed so much when she was dying. My brother used to bring her a martini in a pickle jar, and we'd dump out her water glass. And we'd pour her martini in there. And we're like, when they come to give you a sedative, what do you say? No. It was like a whole thing we had going on. But it was so much in keeping with the character of our family and the way we dealt with everything. And so, of course, that stuff comes out in death as well.
Mm-hmm. That was definitely something that we were very mindful of while shooting, is we wanted to make sure that, not that we were playing into jokes, but that we were allowing for humor always. Because things that are humorless, I don't understand
they don't
either.
Ring true, no. And Oz's work always has a sense of humor. I mean, this is very much an Ozzy Jacobs film, and all of his other films have that as well as the sort of step outside of complete realism. He's always kind of dealing in the fantastical as well.
Thank you so much for coming in. You obviously touched a nerve with our listeners. The stories continue to come in. Such a wonderful, wonderful film. I absolutely loved it, if it hasn't come across as I speak about it. His 3 daughters, Carrie Coon as Katie and Elizabeth Olsen, my guests as Christina. Thank you both so much for coming in. I wish you the best.
Thanks for having us. I hope it's cathartic for your viewers when they see it.
Yes, thank you. Some more coming in. Here's Jane. She says, when my mum was dying, my brother and I did not agree with the way she should be cared for, causing horrible arguments and much heartache. She died in a care home. I was very sad and felt we could have done more to make her death better. When my dad was dying 1 year later, we did everything we could to help him die peacefully at home, which he did, with my brother and I by his side. We both felt we had given him the best death possible, and it healed our broken relationship. Thank you. Keep them coming. 84844.